You have a conversation you need to have with someone. You know who. You've known for a while, but every time you think about starting it, you find a reason to wait. Tonight, that reason runs out. This morning, the moon moved into Scorpio. That's the point where the thing you've been quietly carrying starts to feel heavy enough to put down. At 11:28 a.m. Eastern Time, Mercury trines Jupiter, which basically means the words you need are actually there today, clearer than usual. And then, at 10:38 p.m. Eastern Time, Venus squares Pluto exactly. That's the moment when keeping things comfortable stops being an option, because Pluto pulls up whatever's actually been running the show in this relationship, not the surface stuff, the real stuff. Who bends? Who doesn't? That's the conversation. That's what tonight is about. Here's the part most people miss. The hardest moment isn't 10:38 p.m. It's earlier, when you realize the words are ready and you've got no excuse left. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 3 things. First, what Venus square Pluto actually pulls up, and why it's never about what you think it's about. Second, why today specifically makes that conversation harder to avoid than any other day this week. Third, what shifts on the other side of it, and why that matters right now. You know what needs to be said. Tonight is just the night it stops being optional. You've been carrying this for a while now, not in a dramatic way. You're not falling apart over it. It's more like a low hum in the background, something that's there when you wake up at 3 a.m. and your mind goes somewhere before you're even fully awake. Something that sits under normal conversations, under normal days. You know exactly where it lives. There's a person, and there's a thing between you and that person that hasn't been said. You've thought about saying it more than once. You've probably started sentences in your head. Maybe even in the shower, in the car, walking somewhere. You've had that conversation a dozen times with yourself, but not with them. And the reason you haven't isn't that you don't know what to say. That's the part worth looking at directly. Because most people who are avoiding a hard conversation tell themselves it's a timing problem, or a readiness problem, or they need a little more information first. But you already know what you want to say. The delay isn't about the words. It's about what happens after the words. That's a different thing entirely. What you've been waiting for isn't clarity. You have clarity. What you've been waiting for is a moment where it becomes more uncomfortable to stay quiet than to speak, where the weight of not saying it finally outweighs the weight of saying it. Today is that day, not because you decided it, because 3 things lined up between this morning and tonight that make the math change. And the first of those things already happened. So here's what today actually looks like. Because it's not just one thing happening tonight. It's 3 things in order that each take away a different excuse. The first one already happened this morning. At 11:28 a.m. Eastern Time, Mercury formed an exact trine to Jupiter. Mercury is how you think and how you speak. Jupiter opens things up, makes them clearer, less tangled. When these two connect the way they did this morning, the words that usually feel slippery or complicated start coming in straighter. You know that feeling where you can't quite get to what you actually mean, where you start a sentence and it comes out sideways? Today is the opposite of that. Today the sentence lands where you aim it. And this is the 3rd time Mercury and Jupiter have connected this way. They've been moving in and out of this alignment for weeks. But this morning was the last pass. After today, that specific clarity, that particular ease with words, isn't coming back in the same form this cycle. So if you've been waiting to feel ready to say it, to feel like you actually have the right words, this morning was the moment. The words were there, which means by mid-morning today, the excuse, "I don't know how to say it," was gone. The second thing happened at 1:10 p.m. Eastern Time. The moon moved into Scorpio. Scorpio doesn't let things stay hidden. That's not a metaphor. It's just what this placement does. The stuff you've been managing quietly, keeping contained, holding just below the surface. It gets heavier under a Scorpio moon. Not louder necessarily. Heavier. like it takes more effort to keep it in than it used to. You might feel it as a kind of pressure in your chest, or a sharpness when something in a normal conversation brushes up against it, or just a fatigue, the specific tiredness of carrying something you're not putting down. By mid-afternoon today, keeping this inside costs more than it did this morning. So now both excuses are gone. You have the words. And the weight of not using them is building by the hour. That's the hardest part of today. And it happens before 10:38 p.m. It happens somewhere between noon and evening, when you're sitting with ready words and a growing pressure, and no real reason left to wait. That moment, right there, is where most people find a new excuse, a distraction, something that needs to get done first, one more reason to push it to tomorrow. But tomorrow doesn't have this lineup. And tonight, at 10:38 p.m., the third thing arrives, the one that makes the whole day make sense. That's Venus square Pluto exact. And to understand why that's the point where comfortable silence stops being an option, you need to understand what Pluto actually pulls up when it squares Venus, because it's never what people think it's going to be. So what does Pluto actually pull up? Here's what most people expect. They think the conversation Venus-Pluto forces is about a specific incident, a thing that happened, something that was said or not said. They're mentally preparing for a confrontation about a particular moment, and then they're confused when the real conversation turns out to be about something older and less specific than that. Pluto doesn't care about the incident. It cares about the structure underneath the incident. Venus in Taurus is your comfort zone in a relationship. It's the version of things that's workable, where you know which topics you don't push on, which moments you let pass, which adjustments you make without even thinking about them anymore. It's not fake. It's just the shape the relationship settled into, the path of least resistance that both people quietly agreed to, without ever actually agreeing to it. Pluto in Aquarius looks at that settled shape and asks one question. Who decided this? Not out loud, not in a conversation you remember, but somewhere along the way, a pattern got established. Who brings things up and who doesn't? Whose discomfort gets addressed first? Who does the adjusting when things get tense? One person bends a little more consistently than the other. One person's needs get treated as the default priority without it ever being discussed. It's subtle enough that it can look like flexibility or generosity, or just being easy to get along with. But it's a structure. And Venus square Pluto tonight makes that structure visible in a way that's hard to look past. The hook puts it plainly, not the surface stuff, the real stuff. Who bends? Who doesn't? And here's the thing about that. The person who bends more often usually knows. On some level, they've known for a while. They might not have named it. They might have told themselves it's not a big deal, or that the other person doesn't mean anything by it. But the knowing is there. It's been there. It's part of what's sitting in your chest. What Venus-Pluto does tonight isn't introduce new information. It takes the thing you already know and makes it impossible to keep filing under, "I'll deal with this later." The mechanism of the square is friction, two planets pulling in incompatible directions until one of them gives. Venus wants to keep things stable. Pluto wants the truth of what's actually happening. At 10:38 p.m. Eastern Time, those two things hit exact friction. And the version of the relationship that depends on one person quietly doing all the adjusting becomes the only thing in the room. That's the conversation, not about the last argument or the specific thing that annoyed you last week, about the arrangement, about the fact that only one person in this dynamic consistently moves to accommodate the other, and neither of you has said that out loud yet. The reason this matters right now, why today specifically, is the day this becomes harder to avoid than any other day this week, is about more than just Venus and Pluto. It's about what else landed today and why those pieces together make this the least comfortable day in this entire window to stay quiet. So why today? Why not yesterday or tomorrow or any other day in the window where Venus and Pluto are in tension? Because today is the only day all three conditions are true at the same time. Yesterday was the full moon in Libra, and what that full moon did, if you felt it, was show you two versions of yourself standing in the same room. The version that keeps adjusting, keeps making things work, keeps finding a way to hold it together, and the version that's done with that. That full moon didn't give you a specific action. It just made the gap between those two versions impossible to ignore. You went to sleep last night knowing something had to move, but knowing isn't the same as moving. So you woke up today still carrying it. And then at 11:28 this morning, Mercury and Jupiter lined up for the last time. And suddenly, the thing you wanted to say had a shape. Not a perfect script, not a rehearsed speech, just a clear, honest sentence that actually names what's been going on. That's what Mercury-Jupiter gives you. Not eloquence, just directness. The kind of directness that doesn't require preparation. That's when the last excuse disappeared. Because up until this morning, you could still tell yourself you weren't sure how to start. You weren't sure it would come out right. You needed a little more time to figure out how to say it without it going sideways. That's a real excuse. A lot of people live inside that excuse for months. As of 11:28 a.m. today, it stopped being available. And that's the moment the hook is actually talking about, not 10:38 p.m. tonight, this morning. The hardest moment of the day is when you realize the words are sitting right there and you've got nothing left to hide behind. That's when the discomfort peaks. That's when the mind starts working hard to find something else that needs attention first. By the time the moon settled into Scorpio just after noon, the pressure got physical. Scorpio doesn't give you space to sit comfortably with something unresolved. It just makes the weight of it heavier every hour. Not louder, heavier. The thing you're not saying starts to take up more room than the actual conversation would. That's the specific math of today. Full moon yesterday took away not yet. Mercury-Jupiter this morning took away I don't know how. Moon in Scorpio is taking away I'll get to it. And at 10:38 tonight, Venus square Pluto removes the last option, which is pretending that the current arrangement is still fine. Here's what that actually means if you spend the rest of the day in avoidance. You don't escape Venus-Pluto by staying quiet. Pluto pulls the dynamic into visibility whether you speak or not. The difference between having the conversation and not having it tonight isn't whether Pluto's effect lands. It's whether you're an active participant in what happens or whether it just happens around you while you watch, and what actually shifts on the other side of it. That's the part the hook promised and hasn't delivered yet. So what actually changes on the other side of this? That's the third thing the hook promised. And it's the one most people skip past when they're in the middle of avoidance. Because when you're focused on the dread of the conversation, the other side of it feels abstract, hypothetical, like something you'll deal with when you get there. Here's what's actually there. Tomorrow, April 4th, a grand water trine completes. 3 planets in water signs, emotional, relational, interior, forming a triangle that creates support rather than pressure. Today is pressure. Tomorrow is different. The ground softens. What got cracked open tonight has space to settle into a new shape instead of just sitting there raw and exposed. But here's the specific thing about that. Grand water trine doesn't create something from nothing. It supports what's already in motion. If you had the conversation tonight, if something true got said, if the real dynamic got named, then tomorrow that thing starts finding its footing. The relationship, whatever form it takes after tonight, gets softer ground to move on. The new version of how you relate to this person, or the new version of how you relate to yourself inside this dynamic, has somewhere to land. If nothing moved tonight, tomorrow still feels softer, but you're carrying the same weight into softer ground. And soft ground with unresolved weight is just a different kind of stuck. That's not a warning. That's just the actual difference between the 2 days. And then there's Venus sextile North Node, which runs through April 9th. The North Node in a chart marks the direction that has support behind it, not in a vague sense, but as a navigational point. When Venus connects to it the way it does this week, the new desires and the new positions you're taking in relationships get a natural current behind them. moving toward what you actually want, toward the version of this dynamic that's honest, has backing right now that it won't have in the same way after the 9th. So what shifts on the other side isn't just relief, it's timing. The conversation you have tonight lands inside a window where the thing you say has somewhere to go, where the new position you take has support for the next several days while it finds its shape. You're not speaking into a void, you're speaking into the most supportive stretch of April, and there's something else, something smaller, but more personal. The hook says it directly, what shifts on the other side of it, and why that matters right now. The why it matters right now isn't just about the astrology. It's about what you carry if you don't. You've been living with the weight of this thing unsaid. That weight doesn't sit still. It spreads. It shows up as irritability in unrelated moments, as distance that builds quietly, as a low-grade tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep. The other side of tonight isn't just a changed relationship. It's the absence of that specific weight. That's what's actually available, which brings you to the only question left, what you do between right now and 10:38 p.m. tonight. So here's what the window between now and 10:38 p.m. actually looks like, and what to do with it. 3 things. That's it. The first one is for right now, or as close to now as you can get it. Before the afternoon gets away from you, before you find something else that needs your attention, write 1 sentence. Not a plan, not an outline of everything you want to say. 1 sentence that names the real thing. Not, I want to talk about what happened last Tuesday. That's the surface. The real sentence sounds more like, I want to talk about the fact that I'm the one who always adjusts, and I don't think you see how much. That sentence, or your version of it, the one that names the structure, not the incident. Mercury-Jupiter gave you the clarity to find it this morning. It's there. You just have to stop moving long enough to let it come up. The reason you write it, even just for yourself, even if nobody sees it, is that it makes the thing real outside your head. Right now, it's been living inside you as a feeling, a pressure, a vague weight. The moment it becomes a sentence, it's a fact, and facts are harder to talk yourself out of than feelings. The second thing is what you don't do between now and tonight. You don't rehearse. You don't run through the conversation 100 times trying to anticipate every possible response and prepare a counter for each one. That process feels productive, but it isn't. It's just a more sophisticated form of avoidance. The moon in Scorpio will be adding weight through the afternoon and evening regardless. Sitting with that weight and rehearsing is just doubling the discomfort without moving anything. You have the sentence. That's enough to start. The third thing is the simplest and the hardest. At some point tonight, before 10:38 p.m. or after, it doesn't need to be timed to the minute. You start. Not finish, not resolve everything. You say the sentence. You open the conversation. Venus-Pluto does the rest. That's not a figure of speech. The configuration tonight pulls the real dynamic into the room, whether you plan for it or not. Your job isn't to control the conversation. Your job is to be the one who opened it, to be an active participant in what tonight surfaces instead of someone it just happened to. That's the whole protocol. 1 sentence before afternoon ends. No rehearsing. Start the conversation tonight. It doesn't have to go perfectly. It probably won't. Hard conversations almost never do in the moment. But perfect isn't what's available tonight. What's available is real. And real, in a relationship that's been running on a quiet imbalance, is worth more than a comfortable version of fine. Venus-Pluto passed. The dynamic that was hidden under the surface is visible now. Who holds ground? Who bends? Who's been doing the adjusting? That's out. The conversation happened or it didn't. Either way, the version of you that pretended not to notice is harder to get back to. Tomorrow, a grand water trine completes. What tonight cracked open moves into softer ground. Support rather than pressure. That's a genuinely different feeling than what today was. Subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow is part of this sequence, not separate from it.